Hey, this is Gavin with Videoverse, and welcome to this video. Since we at Videoverse are all here stuck in our homes due to a thing, maybe you've heard of it, we've decided that now is a great time to stretch our creative juices. So here I am in the comfort of my own home with my beautiful wife and baby, bringing you guys my top 10 Final Fantasy games. And really, what better time to do a video like this than right before the most anticipated game of all time, the Final Fantasy VII Remake. But before we get into this, I gotta lay down some expectations. There are two things that you gotta know. One, this is my personal opinion. These are my top 10 Final Fantasy games. I might not have liked your favorite game in the series. And that brings me to point two. I have not played every single Final Fantasy game. And that includes maybe a few of the main series titles. So don't be in the comments like, oh, what the hell, man? You've never played Final Fantasy VII G-Bike? Oh, come on, man. Everybody knows that Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Life as a Dark Lord is the best game in the series. Seriously, dude? Don't even call yourself a Final Fantasy fan if you haven't played Chocobo to Mohu no Ihon, Majo to Chocobo to Mohu no Ihon, Mojo to Shouju to Gonin no Yusha. Guys, but in all seriousness, I love Final Fantasy. I love every game on this list. This has been one of my favorite franchises since I was in the 5th grade. Final Fantasy is easily in my top as far as my favorite series. From the gameplay to the story and everything in between, all of these games are fantastic, and I love all of them. All right, here's my list. I'm going to start off this list with a more unconventional one. Final Fantasy Theatrhythm was the kind of Final Fantasy game that no one really knew that they wanted until someone told them what it was going to be. A Final Fantasy game that is just the music. Its sequel, Final Fantasy Theatrhythm Curtain Call, took that idea to a whole new level. I've always loved rhythm games. I learned how to play Guitar Hero before I learned how to play the guitar. There's some kind of feeling that I get when I play these games that makes me feel like I'm with the band and that I'm actually playing these songs. If you know me in real life, you know how huge music is to me. A lot of my favorite movies and games are considered my favorites due to the music found in their stories. In fact, if I had never heard the main theme song of Final Fantasy VII, also commonly referred to as the Overworld song, I would have never been interested in playing a Final Fantasy game. Theatrhythm Curtain Call is such a complete joy to look at and listen to. It's got over 200 of the greatest songs ever composed, along with RPG mechanics that tell an underwhelming yet very cute story involving musical gods. The gameplay's fun and addicting, and is a must-play for Final Fantasy fans and music lovers all around. Now, I must admit, I have not beaten this game to the credits. In fact, there are some other games on this list that I also haven't totally beat. However, I love every minute that I have played of this game. As someone who loves political intrigue in a fantasy setting, like the Witcher novels, this game constantly leaves me hungry for whatever is about to happen next, and that is considerably due to some of the greatest dialogue that I have ever seen in a game. Seriously, I have not seen such a believable cast of characters in a fantasy setting like this in almost any other game. Something to note though, is that this was the next Final Fantasy game to be released right after the groundbreaking Final Fantasy VII. So this game would obviously have to live up to some expectations. However, when this game was released, it threw all previous expectations of a traditional Final Fantasy game and threw those out the window. Instead, it created an entirely new standard for tactical role-playing games. Instead of the traditional background with the players on one side and the enemies on the other, this game created an entire playing field for the characters to move around on and items to interact with. It truly fleshed out a world for the players to live in. This game is honestly what I believe to be the greatest tactical role-playing game ever made. If I could recommend a version of this game, I personally think that Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions on the PSP is the definitive version of this game. There are various quality of life changes to the game, but the biggest and most important change to me is the updated script. It drastically updates the Old English style of dialogue that I personally find far more engaging to the overall narrative. This one would definitely shock a lot of the hardcore Final Fantasy fans out there, especially since I just put it here above Tactics. But trust me, I share the same sentiment as all of you. However, the main thing that Final Fantasy XV does, that no other Final Fantasy game has done yet, is the realistic and modern fantasy open world. Sure, the story is chopped up and separated into multiple mediums, including a movie, 2 animes, a side-scrolling beat-em-up, some mobile games, and a novel. And sure, some of the writing and voice acting is really repetitive and pretty bad.
Oh, hi there, opening.
But look, for me, this has just one of the most engaging and most beautiful explorative worlds out of any other Final Fantasy game out there. I have spent hours and hours just running around this open world and flying over all of the excellently detailed terrain. And I know a lot of people also talk about its generally simple combat and exploitative magic system, but hey, I like the combat in this game, and I find myself regularly addicted to its combat loop. All in all, Final Fantasy XV might not hold the same spirit as previous titles, but its compelling lore and the world keep me wanting to come back to it over and over again. I actually played Crisis Core before the original Final Fantasy VII. That's actually because I really liked Zack in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. I didn't know that there was a whole universe of Final Fantasy VII games at the time. But when I read online that this game takes place before the OG 7, I thought to myself, I mean, it only makes sense to play this one first. Hey, don't do that. Don't play this game before 7. Trust me, play 7 first. But even without me knowing almost anything about the original 7, I found this game's story to be very emotionally gripping. I remember back in middle school, making my way to the end of this game and for the first time in the series, actually shedding some tears. Without getting too spoilery, the way this game made me care for the characters made me feel genuinely emotional during its final hour. Crisis Core switched up the gameplay from its original turn-based combat to something closer to an action RPG. Though there are some aspects of this game that a lot of people do revere, I find it to be really enjoyable. And it kind of reminds me a lot of playing a more strategic Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. In the end, not only is this one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, but I think it's essential to your PSP game library. Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age is a vastly superior version of the original PS2 title. There are way too many gameplay changes to even list, but trust me, there's enough changes in this version to take it from one of my least favorite games in the series to one of my favorites. The leveling system and combat in this one are some of the most addicting in all of the games, especially with the speed up feature. Now, admittedly, this is another Final Fantasy game that I haven't beat just yet. However, with the same game designer as Final Fantasy Tactics, you can see early on just how much depth is in this world. I can't wait to see where the story goes. But for now, the game sits high on the list for its gameplay alone. I know that for a lot of people, Final Fantasy VIII is either in their top 5, or it's downright their least favorite Final Fantasy game. Nearly every previous Final Fantasy main character has a piece of that I need to save the world for the greater good mentality. But Final Fantasy VIII is a love story through and through, and Squall is as teen angst as it gets. I personally feed off of Squall's emo attitude. And, to be honest, and I promise this is the last time I'm gonna do this on this list, I haven't beaten this game fully either. However, I'm done with its first disc, and I love the story of this game. As for the gameplay, I have to say, this game did turn me off to even getting through the first hour of the game whenever I first played it. That's why I'm putting the 2019 remaster of this game on here. Aside from the character model overhaul, this remaster adds special cheats, similar to that of the re-releases of Final Fantasy VII and IX. And for me personally, it really makes this game truly playable. It's the cheesy, emotional love story unfolding that keeps me coming back to this game, and that's what puts it at the top of my top 5. Y'all, please don't crucify me for not making this my number 1 or number 2. I love Final Fantasy VI. There are just some things about my personal top 3 that hinder this one from being better than those. I love every single character in this game. Even though it's obvious to me that the main character is Terra, the game makes it to where almost any character can be considered the main character. This was the last game in the series before the jump to 3D, and it's obvious that they were pulling out everything in their power to make this a big finale to the 16-bit era of Final Fantasy. The gameplay has a huge amount of variety, allowing each character to learn any ability that they want. And when you get to the post-game, you can use that feature to make the most overpowered party. The main antagonist of this game, Kefka, is truly a legitimately evil villain. I think every person should play this game, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but there's a reason why Kefka is regarded as, arguably, the greatest video game villain of all time. I played this game for the first time this year, and truly believe that this game should be everyone's first Final Fantasy game. If you've never played a game in this series, I highly recommend that you find a way to play the original Super Nintendo version of this game. Whoa man, this game seems pretty high on your list. Yeah, whatever dude, I love this game. Like I said earlier, if it weren't for me listening to that main theme song of Final Fantasy VII, I would have never even gotten into the series. Thankfully, I did get into it, and the first game that I played was the original Final Fantasy on the PSP. This game holds a high regard in my life. If it weren't for this game, I probably would have skipped out on every other RPG. The story isn't as deep and as intricate as many Final Fantasy games would later be, but in 1987, this game was considered a high fantasy epic. With Dragon Quest existing around the same time, this game had a high standard to live to. The gameplay is as primitive as you can imagine for an RPG nowadays, but with all the choices and what classes you could have picked to be in your party, there's a lot of replay value here. I recommend for anyone who wants to play this game to play the PSP version. Aside from its graphical overhaul, the PSP version includes the most content out of any other version. New dungeons, weapons, enemies, updated dialogue, etc. It's not the most impressive game in the whole series, but I still love it, and I honestly consider it as one of my top 3 favorite games in the series. Guys, there's really not anything else to say about this game that hasn't already been said. There's a reason that Final Fantasy VII Remake is the most anticipated game ever. Really, the most engaging thing about the gameplay of the original game is its materia system. And honestly, that's just kind of an evolution of the Esper system found in Final Fantasy VI. That's not at all to say that I think that this game is boring to play or unoriginal. Not at all. I'm just saying that the gameplay is not what took hold of so many gamers back when it came out. It's the story and the characters. The story of this game is something far too extensive to explain in a top 10 video. And the characters in this game are easily some of the deepest of any game that I've ever played, with great arcs and changes throughout the story. That's all that I even want to say about it for right now. And if you haven't played this game, just stop what you're doing and play it. Seriously, it is available on every screen created. Go play it if you haven't.
Chocobo and Mahonoian, Magico, Shoujo.
Final Fantasy IX is easily my favorite Final Fantasy game. Although, I think it would be hard for me, personally, to recommend this game as someone's very first Final Fantasy. This game is a very unique entry in the whole series for a multitude of reasons. And one thing to note here is that this is the last game that Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, had as a major member in creating this game. This game symbolizes many things for the Final Fantasy series as a whole. For many people, it was a swan song dedicated to every single previous game in the series, with hundreds of references throughout the game that only those who have played the other ones can really appreciate. Others see this game as the last truly great Final Fantasy game. It was the last game in the series to stick without any of the voice acting, and for lots of people, that's where the series sort of goes downhill. Final Fantasy X was great, but there's no denying that the voice acting hindered the final product. And that goes for many of the other following games. The leveling and ability system in Final Fantasy IX is by far my favorite in the series. Every character is entirely unique and can learn totally different abilities from the equipment that you find and earn in the game. It features some of the best post-game content, including some of the coolest weapons, side quests, and super bosses in the whole series. The story is a genuinely touching and inspiring narrative about purpose and finding out who the person inside of you truly is. I could go on and on about this game and why it takes the top spot in my list, but I'm not trying to take too much time. So that's it. These are my top 10 favorite Final Fantasy games of all time. There are a few games that I know that a lot of people are going to be sad that aren't on this list. For instance, Final Fantasy IV and V are, once again, games that I have not beaten. However, I'm in quarantine with my modded Super Nintendo, so I don't know. I could play it sometime soon. So let us know in the comments what your top 10 Final Fantasy games are. How would you set up this top 10 list? I want us to have a discussion. I'll be in the comments. If you leave your comment, I promise I'll read it and we'll have a discussion. We'll talk about all things Final Fantasy. There's a few Final Fantasy games on the channel that we've actually played on the show. Be sure to check those out. If you haven't, I'll leave a link to those in the description. Do you have any suggestions for videos similar to this one? Let us know. I know, for instance, I'll be back again with my ranking of every Kingdom Hearts game, so be sure to stick around for that one. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a like and share it with people. And lastly, make sure to subscribe to Videoverse, click the notification bell so that you always get notified whenever we upload our weekly videos. Bye!